Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for part 2 of an important webinar series focusing on the path to developing and delivering a COVID-19 vaccine and the numerous associated challenges. In our first session, we covered vaccine hesitancy from a global perspective. Today, we'll take a step back as our incredible expert panel helps us to understand really the nuts and bolts of delivering a new vaccine worldwide and unpack the many challenges involved in global distribution, particularly to populations that need it most. I'm Donna McKay, the Executive Director of Physicians for Human Rights, PHR. Today's conversation is the 27th in PHR's COVID-19 themed webinar series since March. Each week, we've dived deep into the implications of the pandemic through the critical lens of health and human rights, with the expert perspectives of healthcare workers, scientists and researchers, advocates, and voices from the front lines. Our goal is always to bring science-based analysis and approaches to guide all of our responses to this massive public health crisis. We have over 400 people live with us today to hear from experts in vaccine development and global immunization. I'm pleased to welcome our esteemed panel today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. So let's get started. I'm pleased to welcome Nina Schwalbe as moderator of the two-part series. She's worked tirelessly to plan these discussions, which are not only informing our participants, but also PHR's own position. So Nina, thank you so much. Nina teaches in the Department of Population and Family Health at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health and is founder and principal at Spark Street Advisors, a public health advisory. Nina has served as the director of Open Society Foundation's public health programs, managing director at Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and acting chief of health at UNICEF, where she oversaw programs in over 150 countries. She's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a principal visiting fellow at the United Nations International Institute for Global Health, and chair of Gavi's Evaluation Advisory Committee. Nina, thank you again, and I turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much. I'm so pleased to be here, and with many thanks to Donna, Michelle, Kathy, Samantha, Alexa, and the team at PHR. I'm, again, extremely pleased to be here to moderate the second panel in this two-part series on COVID-19 vaccines. As Donna mentioned, last week we focused on the demand side and the importance of vaccine confidence, engaging communities, and shifting from the perspective that communities need to understand science to the idea that scientists need to understand community. Today we're going to focus on the supply side, exploring, as Donna said, the nuts and bolts of what it takes to deliver a vaccine from a manufacturer to a person. The question is, if Coca-Cola can be found on almost every corner of the world, how hard can it be to deliver a vaccine? As with last week, the run of show will be moderated questions for the first 30 minutes, and then we will open the floor. So please submit any questions through the chat function, and the team will aim for us to get to as many as we can today. So now to introduce our incredible panelists. Bruce Gellin is the president of global immunization at the Sabin Institute. Based in DC, Sabin focuses on global vaccine development, availability, and use. Bruce chairs WHO's advisory group on influenza and has served as the director of the National Vaccine Program at the US Department of Health and Human Services. At HSS, he was responsible for developing the National Vaccine Plan, which is the US blueprint for all aspects of vaccine and immunization. He also coordinated the US government-wide efforts on seasonal influenza. We are so lucky to have Bruce join us today. Robin Nandy is our second panelist, is the principal advisor and chief of immunization at UNICEF. UNICEF is the single largest buyer of vaccines in the world, procuring more than 2 billion doses of vaccine annually on behalf of nearly 100 countries. Trained as a clinician in India, Robin has served as the team lead for UNICEF's Health and Emergencies Program and its Global Polio Eradication Initiative. He has worked around the world and in several conflict-afflicted zones, including with the International Rescue Committee, a group close to the heart of PHR. Robin, we were colleagues for many years, and thanks so much for being here today. So now we'll start with the questions. Bruce, before we talk about COVID vaccines, can you give us a few statistics on progress with regard to vaccine coverage in the last 30 years? Where have we come?
No, it's actually, it's a great story that I'm not no longer surprised that it's a story that not as many people are aware of. And I think 30 years is the right time frame when you look back at a number of different things. In the U.S., the development of a program called the Vaccines for Children program was a game changer. And what this shows, and I'll talk about the global scene as well, is that when you put together commitment, policies, program, and funding, you can do unbelievable things. So the U.S., this sort of program that ensures that cost is not an object, and that has done a huge amount to increasing the availability of vaccines for children. And in fact, more than half the kids in the United States get free vaccine through that program. And it's achieved incredible things in terms of coverage, but more importantly, what were once the sort of routine infections of childhood are now called vaccine preventable diseases, and they're disappearing from everyone's experience. On the global front, there was a recognition 20 years ago that the vaccines that were otherwise available were not getting out there. And that created the organization that, Nina, you spent a lot of time leading and working with at Gavi. And that was, again, a commitment of funding, policy, and programs to deliver vaccines around the world. I'll let the audience look at the websites to see that, but just a few of the headlines that are just worth thinking about. That, you know, in that 20-year period, more than 800 million children have been vaccinated through the program, more than 1 billion vaccinations through vaccine campaigns, and 250 million future disability-adjusted life lives have been averted. So the impact of vaccines has been demonstrated around the world. And then finally, because it's the flu season, it's worth a little, at least in the United States, a sense of influenza. That now it's routine that we see what's going on now, and there's an incredible demand for flu vaccines. But just 30 years ago, the United States used only about 20 million doses of flu vaccine a year. This year, the manufacturers are making 200 million doses. Again, it's a combination of the understanding of the impact of disease, programs, and policies. But just to give a sort of background on where we are in the US and globally.
Great, thanks so much, Bruce. Robin, Bruce talked about some of the progress that we've seen over the last 30 years, particularly including in global immunization. How has the COVID pandemic impacted delivery of routine vaccines in low and middle income countries?
Yeah, thanks, Nina. And just adding on to Bruce, I mean, I think, before answering your question, a quick reflection on where we were in global immunization before COVID hit us. Immunization coverage globally is in the mid 80%. So we have reached a large number of kids globally with immunization. However, over the last 10 years, the progress has stagnated. Why? Because the low-hanging fruit have been exhausted. The last 15% of kids that we are not reaching are in more difficult areas. And we have actually tried to characterize this. And we estimate that approximately 20 million kids globally do not receive the full complement of immunizations available to them. Of these 20 million, approximately 14 million don't receive any vaccines at all. So they live in some of the most underserved areas, conflict-affected areas, in urban slums, in remote rural areas. And we have struggled to get vaccines out to these communities. Now, come COVID, COVID has across the board, across the globe, disrupted immunization services for a variety of reasons. And this includes high-income, middle-income, and low-income countries. In many cases, it's been, diversion of attention, diversion of resources and human resources to deal with the COVID response. In other cases, even when services were being provided, people were unable to access the services because of various levels of lockdown due to transport disruptions. And in many cases, they were not willing to go out to seek vaccinations because they were scared of getting in contact with, COVID-19 infected people and so on. So, there was a combination of things. And of course, health workers themselves were concerned of their own safety And so, you know, things like campaigns and outreach services were, you know, were suspended. So now what this is going to mean is that, you know, our equity gaps are going to be wider, and, you know, there will be, you know, a need to catch up, and a need to catch up on lost ground. But it is the most underserved community, those in conflict affected rural, remote rural and urban poor, that would be disproportionately impacted. And that's what we're trying to react to as a global immunization community.
Right, thanks so much, Robin. And we'll come back to some of those challenges, particularly in the context that UNICEF works with. Now I'd like to step into the COVID vaccines particularly. And Bruce, you know, from a delivery perspective, how might vaccines be similar or different to types of routines in a routine program, some of the diseases you've talked about? What are the challenges in those programs that also might serve as a challenge for COVID vaccines?
I mean, that's really an important question. So what we've been watching so far is what has been characterized as the vaccine race. And this is really the first leg of what is going to be a complex marathon. And I think, I mean, even as Robin highlighted in a broad stroke, many of these challenges, you know, he talked about transport. And one thing that struck me that was news to me as part of the issue was because travel was down, the availability of storage and cargo space on planes was down. And that was another constraint in trying to find how to move vaccines from the manufacturers out to countries. As far as as we get into the race and as it starts to deliver vaccines, the good news on the science side, how many vaccines are in the pipeline and the promise that they have. We know that vaccine development sometimes is often a winnowing process and not all get to the finish line. But let's assume that several do. These are not identical products. And that's really an important consideration because they're handled differently. They have different temperature configurations. One requires temperatures of less than 80 degrees centigrade, and not everybody's got facilities for that from manufacturer all the way to field. Some vaccines are going to require 2 doses, which means you have to get the follow-up of the right dose if you've received that first dose. So it lays out there those complexities. And when you have a number of different vaccines in the marketplace, there will be a question of, well, who gets what, and how do you select which ones are appropriate for which segments of the population? Right now, all of that is unknown until we see from the clinical trials how they perform. But once they're out there, that's really that, as you've highlighted, getting the vaccines out there and making sure that the program understands the complexities is really critical, because with all these complexities, given the urgency, given the rush, there's opportunities there for things to get messed up.
Bruce, I'm going to follow up with a couple questions. 80 degrees negative, what does that mean? Is that like my freezer in my fridge, or what does that mean?
I think it's somewhere in outer space. I mean, these are not your freezers. These are special freezers and refrigerators. And even in the United States, it's not a simple process, because you can't ship to a place that doesn't have those kind of facilities. And there's a parallel effort to make sure that those exist in the places where those can be used. And then once they're taken out of that frozen chain, have to be used within a day before they deteriorate. So while the science and the immunity that comes from these looks promising, the logistics are daunting.
And if they don't stay cold, does that affect how they?
It likely doesn't affect safety, but essentially it makes them inert. You need the temperature to make sure you preserve its immune stimulating properties. So while it's not going to hurt anybody, but it's a huge waste of effort and time to have all that work to develop a vaccine, where if it's somewhere along the line, the temperature strays from where it should be, you've wasted your time, and you've wasted the opportunity to protect people, and you've wasted a lot of money. And I think it feeds into the conversation you had last week about confidence, because if the vaccines aren't going to work, it's not going to be long until people think, well, why are we bothering?
Bruce, I have 2 other kind of techie questions that maybe you could explain to me and the group, which is they talk about efficacy, so the effectiveness of a vaccine. Is that the same for all vaccines, or are there different profiles? And a corollary is, do all vaccines last the same amount? If I get this vaccine, am I protected forever, or does that differ between different products? Could you explain that a bit to us?
Those are all great questions. So I think that you know, the language we use, and probably immunity, and people can think that once you're vaccinated, you've got ironclad protection. Well, it's not quite that. While particularly childhood vaccines, I think, are arguably maybe the most effective products in medicine, where, you know, 80 to 90 to 95% of people who are vaccinated are indeed protected from the disease. That not all products work that way. There's a lot of discussion about our influenza vaccines, which are probably maybe 50% effective, meaning that of the people who receive them, only half people get the full benefit from them. So there's a range of those, and it's also important to get both doses of a 2-dose series, because if the reason you do that is one primes and the other boosts the immune system, and if you only get 1 dose, you're likely not to get any protection. Your other comment is also critically important, but how long it lasts. Not all vaccines have the same duration of protection. Measles vaccines probably have lifelong protection. Flu vaccines protect for a year probably. And so there's a whole range of these. And within a class, the flu vaccines are pretty much the same. The measles vaccines are pretty much the same, but among them, there are huge differences.
Can you just explain what you mean by class in that?
Sorry. So if you look influenza vaccines as a group, that's what I meant by a class, have that level of effectiveness. And the language is a little bit nuanced. The clinical trials are a measure what's called vaccine efficacy. So it's looking at every patient in a clinical trial, comparing those who've been vaccinated, those who don't, and to see who comes down with disease. And that's what determines this measure of vaccine efficacy. We'll be hearing about that soon with the COVID vaccines as they work their way through clinical trials and are taken to the FDA and other regulators.
And presumably with duration of protection, we're going to have to follow these for a while to know what that is?
Right. I mean, so sometimes there's some immune markers that tell you that, but essentially you don't really know until you see it in real time. And that's really an important question, because if you waited to find that answer out without making a vaccine more available, a lot of people wouldn't get the protection that they need. So in fact, that's why studies continue to look at the vaccines once they're approved by regulatory bodies to make sure that they continue to perform as expected.
Great. Okay, thanks. We'll come back to you. I already see the chat is lighting up with questions right now, so we'll come back with other questions. So Robin, based on what Bruce just described, cold chain requirements, 2 doses for some vaccine, problems with getting a second dose, 1 dose for others, what would be your biggest concerns if you were managing a vaccine program in a low-income or middle-income country from a delivery perspective?
Yeah, if I was an immunization manager in a lower middle-income countries, you know, I'd be having sleepless nights at the moment. So why? You know, I'm under a lot of pressure from my superiors. This is a high-profile thing. Everybody wants me to get ready to deliver a new vaccine. If there's huge excitement, it's in the press all the time. And I've been told to plan. But I don't know at this stage, you know, what kind of vaccines I'm going to get. What are the specifications of the vaccines? You know, what are they going to look like? And we're still discussing the target group. So the bottom line here is a lot of planning to be done, but with a lot of unknowns. So you know what I would do is basically work with my team and colleagues and do a contingency planning. Look at a variety of scenarios in terms of what vaccines I can expect to get. Do my cold chain assessments to see what my capacity is and what needs enhancements, and of course also look at the demand side and what vaccine perception is, which you covered in your previous seminar, and there was a lot of good stuff there. In terms of target groups, as an immunization manager, I will acknowledge that there are many things that I would need to do differently than what I normally do on my day-to-day business in an infant immunization program. I need to get ready to vaccinate health workers, vaccinate high-risk population, vaccinate elderly. This is not something that I have a lot of experience with. So I would have to reach out, forge new partnerships, both within the ministry, and within the government, and with partners, to figure out how to reach these groups. And then finally, one of my biggest dilemma when all the hullabaloo is about the COVID vaccine, my interest is to catch up on lost grounds due to the disruption to regular immunization program. As an immunization program manager, I want to keep a balance. I want to be prepared for a new COVID vaccine, but I want to make sure that my regular program is running optimally. I don't want to be in a situation of Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo dealing with the Ebola outbreak and delivering a lot of Ebola vaccines and having more children die of measles outbreaks in the same area during that time. And that balance is going to be extremely key for every immunization manager in every country to maintain.
Bruce, going off script a little bit, do you see those same types of challenges in the US? I think you're on mute, Bruce.
So I have to say that Robin portrayed the sleepless nights of an immunization manager quite well, as far as the range of things to worry about. I mean, the U.S. obviously has a different type of delivery system, but we've experienced the same phenomenon, and the same issues are generically exist as well. I think in addition to the demand side that Robin addressed, you talked about last week, is making sure that you have outlined the populations you're going to receive, who will receive this vaccine. In the US, there's a little more familiarity, but not much, with adult vaccination. So that's maybe a little bit of a leg up. Our influenza use probably gives us some other experience with how to reach some of these other populations. But again, the ability of tracking doses, making sure that the people get the doses as they should, and those who get the second dose get the right one at the right time, is not simple. And as I've told others, and I used, as you said at the beginning, I was in the US government for a long time, and I told some of my colleagues, if you thought that the fiasco about testing for COVID was going to be complex, this has even more potential for complexity in the visibility, because there's so many things that have to go right. You have to expect that there'll be bumps in the road.
Bruce, you've talked in past, I've heard you talked about the difference between vaccines and vaccination. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's really, it's interesting. So when I was at HHS, at the National Vaccine Program Office, that's the role there is to try to coordinate the vaccine enterprise across the US government. I often joke that people like coordination more than like to be coordinated, but that's the job of any manager. I saw that I was dealing with two different worlds. There's the R&D world, who knows all about the science of vaccine development and the processes to get them over the finish line at the FDA. And then there's those who deliver the vaccine. They're really, while you may think there's a little arrow that connects the two, they're really very different. So I think that it's smart of you to focus on the delivery side. Once the vaccines are available, then what? Because they're often perceived in different ways depending on what your perspective is.
Robin, to go back, I mean, you're now going to keep me up at night as well with all those immunization EPI managers. That was a formidable list of concerns. But can you take us through for a normal vaccine? So how does it work through the chain? I mean, it arrives at the airport. That's probably where the EPI manager starts. And then can you talk us a little bit about the chain of delivery, the nuts and bolts of how that works? Maybe give us an extreme example, a couple of extreme examples.
No, I think absolutely. I mean, I think you always hear that an assumption that once you have a vaccine, it gets delivered automatically, and that's not the case. Once you have the vaccine, that's the start of your problem, especially if you're an immunization manager, because you've got to deliver it. You've got to deliver it successfully. So it arrives. It arrives at the point of entry into a country. And it has to go through a number of bureaucratic processes. It's a biological substance. It needs a lot of paperwork to get it cleared of customs. Once you do that, it actually goes into a central warehouse. Most countries have central warehouses and a central cold room where it goes into a cold room. Of course, it has to be transported right through at temperatures between 2 and 8 degrees, 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. Once it gets to a central cold room, it has to go out to peripheral drop-off points. Now that depends on in terms of the size of countries. So bigger countries have interim cold rooms that supply a region. Then from the cold room, it goes out to the health facilities where it needs to be delivered. It's a point of delivery. It's only one point of delivery, because even from the health center, it needs to go further out, to do outreach services and so on. So we've seen variety of transport challenges that are solved through local means. I've seen vaccines being transported through a variety of means, all sorts of animals, camels, donkeys, horses, bullock carts, bicycles, motorcycles, all sorts of things, including people carrying, large coal boxes on their backs as well. Just to point out, I mean, some of the delivery challenges require extremely heroic innovations by our people delivering the vaccine. Of course, there is the new and new innovations as well. We have successfully used drones, for example, to deliver vaccines in remote population in the Pacific Islands. And so we continue to innovate, but some of the local solutions are just as effective as some of our technological solutions in delivering the vaccines. And of course, making sure that a health center doesn't run out of vaccine is extremely critical. It is both a supply and demand issue, because mothers, parents invest a lot of time traveling to health centers to vaccination posts to get their kids vaccinated. Now, if they spend hours traveling there and they don't receive the vaccine, the chances are that they're not going to come back for the next dose. And it's extremely important. We take this very seriously to try and avoid vaccine stockouts, as much as possible.
Robin, just two follow-up questions. You mentioned cold chain of 2 to 8. How does that -2 to 8? How does that compare to what Bruce was talking about vis-a-vis -80? That's the first question. Let's start with that.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. I think most countries have got a reasonable capacity to deliver vaccines between 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, which is what a traditional cold chain looks like. -80, provides a different complexity. But even the -80, just to say, there are countries that have had some experience with -80 cold chain, and these are the Ebola countries, because Ebola vaccine had been delivered using the -80 degrees cold chain. So, as we do our global allocations and we have a menu of vaccines available, we will have to be very carefully triage where we send these various types of vaccines. So, likely the vaccines that need -80 would go to the Ebola countries, or go to the countries with better capacity to transport and store these vaccines. But thanks to Gavi investments and the efforts of all global immunization partners, over the last few years, substantial investments have gone into revamping cold chain across a variety of low and low middle income countries. This is actually going to help us now, as we try to both catch up on COVID related disruptions, but also deliver the COVID vaccine.
If I could just comment on that, I think that, Robin again has laid out the complexity, and there's Noah's Ark of different animals that have transported vaccines is quite vivid. In fact, that we often hear about a picture says 1,000 words. In a few words, Robin's provided images of 1,000. But I think that this whole cold chain thing, while it's improved, also signals, and there was a question in the chat, the opportunity for innovation. And innovation is really about making things simpler. So there's a discussion about making vaccines more thermostable, maybe easier to deliver than needles and syringe. That's not going to help us immediately. There's some work going on in upstream at COVID, but I think that as we look at the immunization programs going forward, these kind of innovations are going to make the reach a lot easier to get to people.
Great. Thank you, Bruce, for that addition. And I mean, Robin, easier to get to people. You know, we know already it can be quite difficult to deliver vaccines to people in humanitarian emergencies. Could you explain some of these challenges and how they might affect delivery of COVID vaccine or others?
So, I mean, I think, humanitarian situations, pose the biggest challenge. You know, when I talked about, 20 million children not receiving the full complement of vaccine, approximately half these children are in conflict-affected situations. So this is prior to COVID, yeah. I mean, this is prior to COVID, in peacetime, if you like, the challenges are multiple. There's often no infrastructure to deliver services because there's been a bad breakdown in the health system infrastructure. There's insecurity, so the health workers are unable to move around and go out to the communities to deliver. Similarly, people receiving services cannot move around as well and go to health facilities, even if they do exist, to seek services. So they are, a gap area for the, for us. There's, the overall transport infrastructure is poor in these conflict-affected countries, and we talk about cold chain. I mean, cold chain requires power, right? It needs electricity to run the cold chain. So, where there is a poor infrastructure, we have, problems then, storing and transporting vaccines. Very importantly, in many conflict-affected and humanitarian situation, who's in charge of healthcare? Sometimes, you have government controlled areas, then you have non-government controlled areas. So, the key is to engage with a variety of stakeholders and the most appropriate stakeholders to deliver vaccines and other essential services. Vaccine is one of many services that these community needs, and including comprehensive primary health care. And it's really important that we engage with the right entity, the right group to actually deliver services. And again, a lot of innovations have happened in the humanitarian space. A lot of one thing that Bruce and I haven't mentioned here is one of the biggest game changers have been solar refrigerators to actually maintain cold chain. The use of solar panels in health facilities where there is no power. So these are the kind of innovations that we've had that successfully led to us being able to deliver in these very difficult situations. But then, of course, you have as soon as there's an exacerbation of conflict, even whatever you put in place gets destroyed. Solar panels get stolen and used for other purposes. So this is it's a very dynamic situation that we have to deal with, and humanitarian and conflict remains our biggest concern, both for existing vaccines, and these are going to be the most difficult situations to deliver the COVID vaccines as well.
Robin, that was a super comprehensive answer, but I just want to follow up on one point. I mean, can you always deliver all the products that you need to deliver to those populations, or do you sometimes have to prioritize where, how does that work? Does everybody get everything all the time, or do people have to prioritize given how difficult it is to get there?
Absolutely. I mean, prioritization is key. Again, we could, get very obsessed with developing, delivering COVID-19 vaccines in all humanitarian contexts. And because it's so high profile, it could really divert our, attention. But to be honest, if there's one or two vaccines that we could deliver successfully, we would prioritize, a vaccine like measles. Measles is still killing children in these situations where the children are already vulnerable. They have nutritional deficiencies, which makes them much more at risk of dying due to measles. And I think it's really important not to forget, because we don't see measles deaths as much in countries like the United States, in Western Europe, and so on, to remind us that if we take our eye off the ball, some of the diseases that we don't see anymore can come back. There's been a lot in the news over the last year about a resurgence of measles, and this is a disease that we had eliminated from the Americas. We had reduced mortality due to measles by 80% relative to 1990 figures, and now we are seeing it coming back. So I think the message to this group is for us not to get complacent about our the successes that we have achieved, and it's never unfinished business. As long as kids keep are born in this world, we need to keep vaccinating. So 85% coverage is as good as the coverage you achieved last year. You've got to go out every year and get 85-90% coverage in these populations, and some very difficult populations.
Great, thanks so much, Robin, for that perspective. Bruce and Robin, I'm now going to turn to some of the questions in the chat. So Bruce, a number of questions. So this is sort of, we're switching gears, that again, from that very kind of sobering eye on the ball. Bruce, safety is coming up around the COVID vaccines in particularly. What processes and systems are in place to ensure safety in the US? And are those same processes around for global procurement? Can you talk a little bit to that, Bruce?
So I mean, I think it's important to highlight that safety is central to vaccination. You're giving vaccines to people who are healthy to prevent them of something in the future that they might run into. And therefore, the bar for safety is arguably higher than for any other medical product. And particularly when the programs have featured children, that's even raised the bar even higher. So there are a number of safety systems in place that start at the very beginning. I mentioned about the COVID vaccine pipeline. When you look at vaccine R&D overall, many things that start off as a good idea don't work all the way, work their way through the finish line. They fail because they don't have the immune response, or they might not be able to manufacture them, or there's some safety issue that lights up, which takes it off the table. So from the very beginning, safety is an issue. We're going to hear about this in the coming discussions at the FDA because of the concern that COVID vaccines have been moving so quickly. Have any corners been cut? And I think that the recent news about the pause in clinical trials because a signal has been detected in a few studies, to me, is a good sign. That tells you that these systems that are in place, that the people who do this work all the time know about, now the public can see that actually you're finding the people who are speeding on the highway, and you're detecting things that might be problematic. That requires a looking into. So in these clinical holds, and we're just highlighting this for a second, something happens. The data and safety monitoring board says, hey, take a look at this. Everything is stopped until you look at it to try to determine, was this caused by the vaccine or was this a coincidence before you proceed on? So that's one level. And in the discussions at the regulatory, and by the FDA and other regulators, in addition to how well it works, is how safe it is. What do we know about that? These clinical trials are huge, 30,000 person clinical trials, which will give us a lot of information, but they're not going to tell us if something has a safety level of less than 1 in 10,000 per se. And I think that's when vaccines are used more broadly is when you have to continue to look at safety. And there are safety monitoring systems in all countries. There's a range of them. In the US, we have a number of different systems, the CDC, the FDA, the military, Medicare, the VA, and all these are windows on the experience that people have after they're vaccinated. And I think that particularly with COVID vaccines, we're gonna be vaccinating a number of people who might not have been vaccinated before. And when adults are vaccinated, they're gonna continue to have adult medical problems. They may or may not be related to vaccines, but if somebody has a heart attack within an hour of being vaccinated, is it that, or was it bad luck? And so that's why these systems are really gonna be important to be in place to try to sort some of these things out. Because when you have a massive program like this and millions of people are vaccinated, they're still going to have their medical problems, and it's going to be really important to be able to tease out if the vaccine caused them or whether or not it was something that happened that was likely to happen otherwise. So the systems are in place everywhere. On the global front, the vaccine safety blueprint was recently refreshed by WHO, and that gets into some of these other systems, and we might want to talk into this. It falls under the rubric of health system strengthening. And I think that's an important element of this to make sure that systems in country are able to handle the range of things from monitoring the cold chain to making sure that there are communication efforts to safety systems and the like.
Thanks, Bruce. Robin, I mean, UNICEF, you guys procure 2 billion doses. Do you just take any old thing off the shelf?
No, I think as Bruce said, I mean, I think, what Bruce described in the United States is basically replicated globally as well. And, and each country has their own regulatory systems, some stronger or weaker than the others. But in order to, address that, the World Health Organization has a very robust system of regulatory approval and pre-qualification process, and UNICEF would normally purchase and distribute only vaccines that have passed through the WHO pre-qualification process. I think just to highlight a few things that Bruce mentioned and really highlight that vaccine safety surveillance doesn't ever stop. It doesn't ever stop even after the vaccine has been in use for a number of years. It does continue, and each country has got its own mechanism to monitor adverse events due to vaccination, and these are and they usually go with standard protocols on what to do and what actions to take when there is a suspected adverse events due to a vaccine. Really want to highlight one thing that Bruce says, that coincidental events are extremely important to actually separate from true vaccine adverse events. And oftentimes we see a condition or a situation attributed to a vaccine, but on a thorough investigation, we see that it's a coincidental event. This will happen much more, as Bruce says, with COVID vaccines, just because it is delivered to a age group that is more susceptible to illness, if we are talking about elderly and high risk population. So in terms of system strengthening, as we prepare to deliver COVID vaccines, it is an opportunity now to ensure that each country beefs up their adverse events reporting and response system. And towards this, just to make our audience aware, we have developed with WHO, UNICEF collectively have developed a COVID-19 vaccine readiness checklist that is being has been sent out to all countries, and this checklist will be used both to ensure preparedness, but also to monitor the level of preparedness prior to vaccine delivery.
Great, thank you.
Add one, if I could, just one other element that I think is important, particularly with a very complex program. Sometimes it could be the vaccine, that for whatever that antigen causes a serious adverse event in an individual. But sometimes it may be the preparation of the vaccine and its administration. These are rare, but we know that there are situations where when you have to mix a diluent in with a vaccine before you give it, people have given the wrong things. And so again, there was a tragic situation a year ago where muscle relaxant was injected, and two children died immediately after being vaccinated because they were paralyzed by this, because it was an inappropriate mixing. It doesn't happen often, but it does speak to when there are many new things and they're very complex, the importance of making sure that the people who are doing this are aware of how this may or may not be different from what they've done in the past with different vaccines. And as you said before, we have a number of different products that may require different handling at the bedside, and that'll be critically important to get that right.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask one more kind of technical question, which has come through the chat of Bruce, and then I think we're going to move to sort of start the conversation on global distribution, which has come out in a number of questions. But Bruce, there's a question that is asking related to the flu vaccine and the fact that there are different strains of flu vaccines. How do you deal with that as different strains come up? And we know that this is going to be an issue with COVID as well. So can you talk a little bit?
And let me raise that because it was another question related to the potential of the coronavirus to mutate. That's being watched very carefully. And in fact, there have been some mutations of this coronavirus that have not been significant enough to change the vaccine to be off target, which means that the vaccine is directed at parts of the virus, and should those virus parts change, the vaccine might miss them. That's what we do. That's every year the situation with influenza. We're watching it carefully with coronavirus because they're both influenza or coronavirus or RNA vaccines. And all you need to know about that for these purposes, they mutate a lot, and you have to watch that. But essentially, that's not the influenza vaccine race, but the influenza vaccine chase. Every year, we have to do global surveillance to see what the viruses look like and tailor make the vaccines to be on those targets. Sometimes we get it right, and sometimes the evolution continues and you miss it. But that is critically important because that has implications for how effective the vaccine will be.
Thanks, Bruce. And one sort of follow-up techie question. There's a question about animal models. Like often we test vaccines, we have good animal models that predict how it's going to look when it comes to me and my kids. Do we have reasonable animal models, or do we know about that for the coronavirus?
Well, so the question is, what's a reason? The only reliable animal model is us as the animal model. And others might be helpful, but none are exactly the same. And so when you read the literature about COVID vaccines, there's a lot of work in non-human primates. And while that's encouraging to tell us that we're on the right track, it's only the result of these clinical trials that will tell us exactly if they work or not. Immunologists often have a sort of a joke about that mice lie. And you can do a lot of things to stimulate an immune system in a mouse. Sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes when you look back, it was misleading. So animal models are helpful in the development process only so far. If they were perfect, we wouldn't have to do clinical trials, but they're not. So that's why the clinical trials are so important.
Sorry, great. Thank you, Bruce. So now actually I'm going to turn for the last 5 minutes to this question of global distribution. Because it's come up, and I think I'm going to encourage PHR that you're going to need probably 3 or 4 seminars on this conversation alone. Robin, maybe you could set the stage. There's a new global, and actually again, a number of people on the chat have raised it. So clearly it's people know about it. There's something called COVAX, the COVAX facility. UNICEF's engaged in this. Can you just give us a little background on it and what it is and why people are so excited about it?
Yeah, this is much longer than a 5-minute discussion, but I'll do my best. As everybody knows, there's this initiative called the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, the ACT-A initiative. The ACT-A initiative has 3 pillars: vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. And it has a cross-cutting health system strengthening connector. COVAX is actually the name for the for the vaccine pillar. So this is basically the work stream that is responsible for coordinating the completed development, and then the procurement, and then the distribution readiness of the vaccine globally. Within this COVAX, there's the COVAX facility, which is actually the funding mechanism. It's a pooled funding mechanism where countries and economies make upfront investment in the purchase of these vaccines, and basically ensures that they secure doses for a particular proportion of their population. Right now, the Strategic Advisory Group of experts in immunization have recommended that the early doses of vaccine be prioritized for health workers to get the health systems going, social workers, and high-risk populations. And this approximately amounts to about 20% of a national population. What are the benefits of using the COVAX facility? Is basically to manage risk, because otherwise countries would have to make their own call in terms of what vaccine candidate they invest in, and they attempt to procure. At this stage, we don't know what vaccines are going to emerge through the pipeline. So the investing in the COVAX facilities helps countries manage the risk of betting on the wrong horse, if you like, and also ensure that they secure some doses of vaccines. Countries will look at procuring vaccines from outside the COVAX facility as well, and that's inevitable. But we are seeing a lot of interest and investments in the COVAX facility. Two other points to make, and I think this also adds to Bruce's response that there is no risk being taken in terms of vaccine safety. I mean, vaccine safety is going to be ensured as the vaccines continue the process of development, clinical trials, and into licensing and delivery. The risk that is being taken now is risk of investments. So the reason that we have been able to move so fast in COVAX development is the fact that people have invested at risk and put forward financing with the understanding that some candidate vaccines are going to succeed and some will fail. And then finally, it's this COVAX pillar that has got a work stream on country readiness that is coordinating country preparedness for COVID delivery, and taking into consideration both the supply side, demand side, policy, and so on, at a country level. I also see a question in the chat on the demand side, and I think not to repeat what you heard in the first iteration of this series, but maintaining trust in the system that delivers the vaccine and having trust in vaccines is going to be extremely important to ensure uptake of these vaccines.
Bruce, as I turn it over to you for a couple of last words, including on, thank you, Robin, also including on COVAX, there is a question that came in. Robin mentioned that, there are systems in place for safety. There is a question about, Russia's approved a vaccine actually without a phase 3 clinical trial. Can we be sure that those systems are working? You're on mute, Bruce.
I think we're sure of the systems we know about. I don't know their system. It seems that there's the opportunity to miss things there. So I think that you'd have to look again at that. And maybe they'll get lucky. And as they have experience, then we'll see how it plays out. But I think that these systems we've mentioned are really critically important, really from the beginning all the way through. And Robin made an important point. It's vaccine safety surveillance. Looking for that never ends, because that's a continuing part of the system. And I think you can, it may be a litmus test for many systems of how well they do that, because it's increasingly important that people know that the authorities are continuing to look. It's a big part of the big part of the trust. You're muted.
Sorry, now I'm on mute. Thank you so much, Bruce and Robin. Really amazing discussion. And again, just a perfect entry into all the discussions that we'll need to have moving forward. So Donna, with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Nina. This was an incredible conversation. And Nina, Bruce, Robin, really thank you. It was rich, and even if it were sobering. You began your opening remarks, Bruce, describing vaccine delivery systems for COVID as a complex marathon, and you each helped us to appreciate these challenges and systems and approaches that will need to be considered to ensure a successful distribution, including and especially to populations who will need it most. You all have such a keen understanding of this issue, and your deep insights help us to understand these complexities we're facing, and also just how essential the role of health workers and scientists are in guiding us through this pandemic. At PHR, we're doing all we can to ensure that conversations and solutions are grounded in science and respect the human rights of all. So in that respect, we're running alongside you in this marathon. And Nina, thank you especially for putting together this two-part webinar series. For those of you who missed last week's webinar on vaccine hesitancy moderated by Nina with Dr. Heidi Larson and Robert Kanwali, you can find it and all of our webinars on our website. Also, these discussions are recorded, so please consider sharing them with others who might be interested, or with others that are in a position to engage these issues. So we hope to see you next week and the following weeks ahead when we have also very important conversations. Until then, again, just Nina, Bruce, and Robin, thank you so much for this conversation today. We're so grateful.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Donna.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.